I'll put my stuff down.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Johnny. This time I pressed the record button, and I'm so thrilled today to have with us on our interview JJ Virgin. Now, I know I say I'm thrilled all the time, and I do mean it all the time, but I'm really especially thrilled because I've known JJ, 14, 15 years going on now, 1998? I've known her since she was a
Do you
rep for
actually remember
vitamin.
the date?
It's a long time. It's a long time. And I've watched her career just skyrocket. And what you guys probably don't know is the backstage stories. Is she's done so much for so many people in the health profession business and just brought us together to be mutually supportive and get our messages out there and help one another get our messages out to the audiences. And I just love you, JJ. She's been an inspiration to me. She knows so much, and I really am delighted to have you on here. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. And I want to go right to something that you and I have talked about offline 5,000 times in our lives, which is sugar. You have this wonderful new book coming out, The Sugar Impact Diet. So let me just go right to the big question of the day, just to set the stage for everything. What is so bad about sugar?
You know, 5 years ago, if you'd said you're going to write a book about sugar, I'd have been like, nah. You know, I really wasn't interested in it. When I wrote The Virgin Diet, the biggest question I kept getting asked was about sugar. And it seemed like people fell into two camps. They were either controlled by it and they just couldn't give it up, or worse yet, they were confused by it. And this is what I see, and this is what's really breaking my heart, because this is where it's not your fault, is we're eating less table sugar than ever. I mean, where do you ever go, Johnny, that you sit down and someone like uses table sugar?
Never.
But yet we're eating more sugar than ever. I mean, turn of the century, when we had 0.75% obesity, the average person was eating 5 pounds of sugar a year. Now at nearly 35% obesity, it's now at 152 pounds of sugar a year, but it's not from table sugar.
Yeah.
Sugar is sneaking into the craziest places. And I blame it all on Ansel Keys.
Well, of course,
Right?
we always blame everything on
Blame
Ansel Keys.
everything on
Tell
Ansel.
the audience who Ansel Keys is.
Yeah.
There's a few people who don't know who he is.
Okay, so who hasn't heard a Jonny Bowden rant on Ansel Keys? So about 30 years ago, Ansel Keys and this amazing, brilliant guy, John Yudkin, we're going through both of them independently. We're trying to figure out what was causing heart disease. Yudkin said it was the sugar. What a brilliant man. So ahead of his time in the biochemistry of it.
Absolutely.
Keys said it was the fat. And Keys won, discredited Yudkin, and all that Susan Powter stopped the insanity ensued, with the manufacturers pulling the fat out of food. When they pulled the fat out, they put the sugar in, and it was a perfect storm, because around that same time, the price in sugar stabilized with high fructose corn syrup coming out of Japan. And what the food manufacturers discovered is that when you put sugar in, people buy more of it. They get hungrier and they buy more, because sugar is a drug. And in fact, sugar is our number one drug of choice.
Let's jump to that, because I that was a later question. But since you brought that up, sugar is a drug. We hear this a lot. We hear that it's addictive. What's the real story? Why do you say sugar is a drug?
Oh, and I just saw this little article posted that said, you know, people are saying sugar is a drug. There's no scientific evidence on
Tell us about it.
PubMed. Well, you know, the one study showing that was 8 times more addictive than cocaine, but the
8
study
times.
I love the most is the rat study from Connecticut College on Oreos versus morphine. I think this is hilarious.
Tell us.
Oreos. Our number one cookie of choice in the United States is the Oreo cookie. I don't even know what the hell is the middle of that Oreo.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. I asked at a big audience the other day, what is in there? So they gave rats morphine, and it lit up the pleasure center of their brain. And then they gave them Oreos, lit up the same pleasure center of their brains. And then they gave the rats a choice, Oreos or morphine. And the rats went for the Oreos over the morphine and cracked them open. They did the same thing we all do. I don't do it, but, you know,
You've heard people do this, right?
And I used to, and go straight for the center of that Oreo. So what's really scary is that sugar is actually triggering the pleasure centers of our brain, our reward center, and it's addictive. And the worst addiction at all, the trifecta, is when you put in dairy, gluten, and sugar. We know dairy raises insulin more than sugar does, that wheat bread raises blood sugar more than sugar does. But all of these have an opiate-like effect on the brain. So that cereal with milk that you had for dessert last night, you know, that little snack before bed, that was a drug.
Yeah. So what's the impact on our health of this?
And I love that you said impact, because as I was looking through this, I went, you know, we've been looking at sugar all wrong. We tend to look at sugar and then go, well, just, go have this wheat bread instead. But, all carbohydrates except fiber turn into sugar, either fructose or glucose. So we really have to look at what's happening hormonally to our GI system, to our neurotransmitters when you eat. And when you look at what's happening to our health, I mean, on the broad scale, there's studies to show it impacting heart disease, cancer, diabetes, osteoarthritis, dementia. I mean, so that goes on and on. But that takes time to progress. You don't become diabetic overnight. What to me is scary is what it's doing on a daily basis. I mean, a study just showed that in 7 days of eating an artificial sweetener, which is another high sugar impact food, you can change your gut microbiota so that you're glucose intolerant. In one bad sitting of cake, in a couple hours, your energy crashes, your focus is gone, you get bloated. So you look at all these higher sugar impact foods, and in a matter of hours or days, you start to notice the effects. And that's what I'm most concerned about is, the cost to our quality of life of having low energy, of having to eat every 2 hours because you're a sugar burner, you can't access stored fat for fuel, of not being able to focus, of having ADD, of being moody, of being depressed, of being addicted, that feeling where you are controlled by something so that every night, no matter what your best intentions are, you're not going to have it. It's like, come get me.
Well, it creates its own desire, a desire for it. And when you eat it, I always say this is why you can eat 6 bowls of cereal while you're watching reruns of Friends, but you don't eat 6 steaks and 6 portions of Brussels sprouts. So these foods have actually been engineered to cause us to desire them even more. Is that correct?
Yes, they have. And and that's why I say it's our number one drug of choice. I mean, little kids aren't smoking and drinking. They're having juice and cookies, and apple juice is worse for you than a Coke. It's got more fructose than a Coke. And so the more you eat of it, the hungrier you get and the more you want, and your body now can only use sugar for fuel because you become insulin resistant. So you're absolutely trapped in this downward spiral where both your brain wants it, your taste buds want it, because the more sweet you eat, the more sweet you want, and your metabolism is fueled on it, and you're just screwed. Right?
Before we get into the actual, I want you to talk me a little bit through the sugar impact diet. But let's address this issue of high fructose corn syrup, because there's so much back and forth with the Corn Refiners Association and the publicity back and forth, and now they're trying to say that sugar is like a health food because it's not high fructose corn syrup. Would you please dispel for us once and for all? Maybe they need to hear it from you. They've certainly heard it from me. Yeah. That these two things are virtually identical.
They're the same. I mean, it's like, it used to be a little different because there was mercury in the high fructose corn syrup.
But, okay, so
the thing, sugar is sugar, and it's really how much, what the combination of fructose and glucose is in that sugar. So high fructose corn syrup, they're now saying they lied, it's actually higher in fructose. But what you're really trying to get down to is everything's going to turn into fructose or glucose, and ideally, fructose, you want to have as little fructose as possible. I mean, that's
when in its natural setting, right? You want to make that
no, I'm going to tell you that actually, fruit. Okay, so 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day. Fruit is not free food. Fruit is not free food. This idea that we can have, the USDA My Plate says 5 servings of fruits and vegetables.
They make them even, and they're not.
As if kale equals a banana. I mean, no. Seriously, really, and they even make it even worse than that, as if raisins equal, kale, or juice equals kale. So the deal is, if you're going to eat fructose, the place that fructose naturally occurs the highest is in fruit. And nature actually was smart because they put fiber in there with nutrients. But if you unwrap it and get rid of the fiber and condense the sugar and give yourself a big hit, or do something really silly like think agave is a health food, which is the highest source of fructose beyond just crystalline fructose, you get in trouble. Now, here's the deal. The more fructose you eat, the better your body gets at transporting it. You've got something called the GLUT5 transport system, and your body, that's why if you give a little kid fructose, they get diarrhea, but the more you eat, you adapt to this. You do not want to get good at transporting fructose because it goes straight to the liver where it tells your body to make fat, and it bypasses the satiety signals along the way, so you're making fat and you're still hungry. But if your body changes very rapidly with fructose, so if you pull fructose out of your diet 100% for a short period of time, not only do you lose the sweet taste, you also lose the ability to transport fructose well, so you get worse at making fat, and you start to get back in touch with your appetite control center. Mm-hmm. So while I say long-term, 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day is great, not more than that, it's not free food. And it needs to be fresh in its natural packaging. Don't take it out, right? But when you're trying to break that vicious cycle of being a good fructose transporter, you got to get all fructose out. You got to drive that down to as close to zero as possible.
Mm-hmm. So talk us through the sugar impact diet. What's going on?
Okay, so here was my goal. My goal first was to end a silly confusion over sugar and have people, because if one more person says, but it's natural.
Oh my God.
I'm like,
you and I get pissed off by the same things. I know.
It's
yes,
natural,
I know.
people. So, I wanted to end the confusion, but I also wanted to help people take back control, because what I realized for all of us, me included, is that it's sneaking into places you'd never expect. And all of a sudden you're going, holy moly, who knew that my salad was actually a sundae? Because I put the balsamic vinaigrette, that's basically syrup. Balsamic is syrup. Mm-hmm. I put the dried fruit, I had the glazed nuts, and then I had some glazed fish on top, which is code for shined with sugar. Glazed donut, glazed fish. And all of a sudden you've got more sugar and a higher sugar impact on that salad than you would if you just had a sundae. So what I have people do first, I was determined, I believe, that we can get rid of our sweet tooth, take back control in 2 weeks or less. That's what I set out to prove. Mm-hmm. And because I think that a lot of the reason we have this high sugar sweet tooth is, of course, there's the genetics, but I think we've really trained ourselves. Exposure equals preference. And when 80% of the processed foods have added sugar in them, that's before you count the natural sugars that are still sugar, right? And the carbs, we've got a problem. So the first thing I have people do is look at all the places it's sneaking in. I call it the sneaky sugar inventory, and things you wouldn't think about, like that, green drink you're having that actually has 56 grams of sugar in it because it's mainly fruit purees. Or
no, not all of them. In all honesty, there are plenty of green drinks.
I'm drinking a green drink right now, but I have it specially made. But the thing is, there's a very popular green drink out there.
I know the one you mean.
56 grams of sugar in it, so you must be aware. And it has no sugar added on the label because it's fruit juice. Yeah. So you have to know what you're looking out for. And the dressings, the places it sneaks in is, a lot of these gluten-free foods made with potato starch and
tapioca starch.
Same
impact on blood sugar.
Yeah, same if not more. And so you look at a lot of these grains and roots and fruits and diet foods and dairy, no fat and low fat dairy products and drinks and dressings and sweeteners. And so what I did was I looked at all the places it's sneaking in, crazy silly places, and then I also look at how you're feeling right now in terms of energy and mood and gas and bloating and waist measurement. What are things that could be impacting you? And then I have you take a week. And this is what's so important, because if you accept that sugar is a drug, which is it so clearly is, right? Unless you want to put someone into a rehab center, you can't just pull it out. Mm-hmm. That's setting them up to fail. And I looked at all these programs, Johnny, and I go, wow, there are all these programs that people have done with sugar, and they pull it all out like day one, and people can't do it. It's ridiculous. So for a week, you taper from high sugar impact foods to medium sugar impact. You're having a potato, have a sweet potato. You're having white pasta, have quinoa pasta. You just trade it down. Mm-hmm. You make simple swaps so you don't miss it. And while you're doing that, you're starting to work on getting your body used to going longer in between meals. We do not need to be snacking because you're raising blood sugar and teaching your body to eat sugar and burn sugar, not fat. We start stretching out meal times so that you can start transitioning into being a fat burner, not a sugar burner.
Could you talk a little more about that? Because that's really one of the most fascinating concepts that you've talked about in this book and in other books about the sugar burner versus fat burner metabolism. Could you just take us through that?
I remember when I became a sugar burner, which is not something you want to do, because I became a very low-fat vegetarian. Back in the Pritikin days when fat became evil and Susan Powter ruled the world.
Yes. You're dating our ages by even saying that we know who Susan Powter is. But
I wore leg warmers and thong leotards. So, there it is. It's all out there. I'm so vulnerable. Anyway, I started eating, I tried to get my fat grams down to 10 grams because they were the devil. And when you do that, you're starving all the time, starving, because you can't eat much protein because a lot of the protein sources had fat. So I was basically eating turkey and chicken, very little bits. Then I went full vegetarian. Then I went vegan. And so I was eating every 2 to 3 hours.
I can't even imagine you as a vegan.
I was an angry
person. I can imagine.
Anyway, so angry with cystic acne and 25% body fat, where I sit now about 12 to 15% at 51. So, and work out a quarter of the time. But I had to eat every couple hours because my body couldn't access stored fat for fuel, even though I was, exercising, everything else.
Why would that be? Why would you not be able to access stored fat?
Your insulin's up. When you're eating higher carbohydrate that turns to sugar meals. Every time you eat, you raise blood sugar. And every time you raise blood sugar, you keep insulin up. And every 2 hours, your blood sugar comes down because the insulin came up. But the insulin doesn't have time to come down. So it's like the insulin just keeps riding up. And that tells your fat cells, hey, man, lock the doors. We don't need you. We got enough going on in here, out here. We've got enough fuel. So I had to eat every 2 hours. And that's such an easy test. Like, how do you know if you're a sugar burner rather than fat burner? You never forget to eat.
Yeah.
You can't go 2 to 3 hours without having to eat again. You get really angry, you know.
What do you think this trainer advice that we've been listening to for the past 20 years about eat 5 or 6 small meals and keep your metabolism up? That's utter nonsense, right?
Well, you know what? You keep your metabolism up, but not enough to offset the increase in calories. And even though calories, I'm not a calorie watcher, it's really where they're coming from. You know, it's like I look at some of these popular diets out there that are 1,200 calories divided into 6 meals throughout the day and high carbohydrates. It's one that's been on the New York Times forever. It makes me insane. Tells you that a diet soda is not the issue. It's the habit surrounding it. I go, no, the diet soda is the issue. And also, dude, don't recommend pretzels and chocolate-covered pretzels at night before bed.
They're still doing that?
He's still doing that.
Oh, boy.
He's still doing it. Yeah, we won't name names, but boy, does it make me upset. Anyway, you know, just because it's on the New York Times does not make it gospel.
Hey, there's a guy in the New York Times who walks around, who goes on major television shows saying that that everybody in the country should be on a statin drug. So please, I know about these kinds of
Yikes!
things.
Yikes! Okay, so what were we talking about before we went on to that?
About the sugar burning and the fat burning metabolism.
So how do you know if
accessing your fat stores?
If you can't go more than 2 to 3 hours before you have to eat again, you're a sugar burner. If you feel like you just can't lose weight off your waist, you start to lose weight and it comes off everywhere else, but you look like a potato on stilts, you're a sugar burner. Those are clear signs of it. And what you want to do, and you can transition very quickly, you can start to become insulin sensitive quickly. You can get your body bad at transporting fructose quickly. But that's why we do that transition week. And sometimes it's 2 weeks, depends on how you score in the sugar impact quiz. But then the real revolutionary thing that I did was to take 2 weeks where we drop fructose down to as close to zero as possible.
So no fruit.
And I do this revolutionary new thing where I take fruit out altogether.
Okay.
And, you know, I was like, oh boy, people are going to
They're going to kill you, right?
They're going to freak out. I'm like, it's 2 weeks, people. You can do anything for 2 weeks, anything for 2 weeks. But in 2 weeks, it's like magic happens because all of a sudden, and I proved this with 700 sugar addicts. So when I did this program, I did a little pilot test on it because I knew the science was there, and now I had to prove it. Because you can have the best science, but if you can't put it into practice, it doesn't matter. You know, it had to be doable, and people had to be able to follow it, which is why the taper week was so important. But I took 2 weeks, dropped fructose down, and then I had these people, at the end of those 2 weeks, we go into what I call transformed. And I say, okay, now test back some of these medium sugar impact foods. Let's see how you do. Let's watch your energy, your weight, everything else. Let's try a high sugar impact food. Here's what people said. Sweet food tastes gross. This tastes too sweet. I don't even want it anymore. I appreciate the natural sweetness, like a blueberry now tastes sweet. We are so divorced from natural sweetness with the over sweetness of fructose, which is super sweet. That's why we use it. And these artificial sweeteners and fruit juice concentrates that we don't even, you can't even taste anymore. Once you get down to it, like I'm drinking a green drink right now with kale, chard, cucumber, spinach, and lime. The lime, and my son says the same thing, the lime makes it sweet enough for us, the lime. And, you know, my older son, Grant, who was in the accident, who is like Mr. Sugar, like avoider, he will not touch anything that's sweet at all. He's like, he drinks a green drink every day. He's like, they're absolutely sweet enough because of the lime. So you retrain your taste buds. And I'm telling you this, having been raised on Pop-Tarts with my nickname being Poppy, and then going through my teen years, freaking out about sugar and deciding I was not going to eat sugar anymore. So I traded the Pop-Tarts for bran muffins, the ice cream for frozen yogurt. You getting the picture?
Oh, I get the picture.
You know, I did the Tiger's Milk bars instead of the candy bars.
Yeah, we've all been there, right?
I didn't change anything at all. So, I mean, for so many of us, we've been duped by this misinformation. We're trying so hard, yet we're still struggling. And that's, you know, I'm always trying to change that. It's like, it makes me so upset to see people trying harder and we're just getting worse. We're getting more unhealthy. We're getting more obesity, more heart disease, it's like, it's ridiculous and we're being duped. And it's time to take back your health. And you do that by lowering your sugar impact and taking back control over sugar.
So after you do this 2 week kind of period, and you then add some of these foods back, and people watch their reactions and see what works and what
Yes.
doesn't work. It's very
I love
educational,
to do
isn't it, for
Yeah.
them?
Well, we don't realize that the number one way you can change your health, your mood, your energy, everything is with your fork. It's the first thing you can do is change it with food. We don't connect the dots,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, we don't realize that, like, if your car was rattling because of the type of gas you put in it, you wouldn't just you'd switch back to the other gas.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like all of a sudden you go, okay, I'm going to watch all of these quick indicators.
Mm-hmm.
Your early warning system go energy, mood, gas and bloating, cravings, appetite, weight gain, waistline. Like, it's really quite simple to see. And you see it. I have one gal that, if she eats the sugar or gluten, her blood sugar goes up 20 points and she gains 5 pounds, like, immediately. So once you do that, you're going, oh, you know what? I don't think I really want that anymore, right?
So can you actually get rid of a sugar addiction or a sweet tooth? Is that extinguishable? Do we want to extinguish it? Do we want to live in a world where there's no Ben and Jerry's? Is there any room for this kind of recreational eating once in a while? What do you think?
Well, what I've seen with it now, if you consider sugar a drug, and we just, instead of saying that was sugar, if we made someone an alcoholic and then said, is there room for some recreational tequila?
The answer would be no.
So if you knew something hurt your health, and you look at the turn of the century and the way we used to eat versus now, like, we are, 30 times the amount of sugar and 35 times the obesity level, cause and effect maybe. But if you knew it hurts your health, is there room for that? It really comes down to your quality of life and what you want. And if you broke the vicious cycle and you no longer felt like it tasted good, like, I got to be honest with you, it doesn't taste good to me anymore. And I spent a whole summer trying to perfect the perfect healthy cheesecake because I was so addicted to it.
I'd like the recipe if you did.
I actually did do it, and an amazing pumpkin one too. But I'm making now a pumpkin. Pumpkin's one of the most amazing low sugar impact foods. So we're making
pumpkin. I don't know why people don't talk about that.
Pumpkin
enough.
is
high
one
fiber. It's fabulous.
Amazing nutrients. So I found a squash. First of all, squash. Discover squashes. Squashes are incredible. Squashes are like one of my most favorites. But what I will tell you is there's people who have sweet tooth for all sorts of reasons. Number one, the biggest one is exposure equals preference. We've been trained. You get genetics. We have sweet tooth and sweet taste. And then, of course, things like GI issues, candida, et cetera. But can you change that? Absolutely. Absolutely. And once you do, you don't really want it anymore. And so to me, that's like sweet freedom, not to be corny, but all of a sudden you're sitting at a dessert table. I had a guy who has lost and gained. I mean, he's probably lost over 1,000 pounds in his lifetime. When he found me, he was 316 pounds. Now he's 262 and dropping. And he sent me a picture of him surrounded by cheesecakes. And I'm thinking, this was a sugar addict. He goes, I'm standing in the middle of all these cheesecakes, JJ, and I don't even want them. And isn't that really where you'd rather be?
Very liberating, isn't it? I can imagine.
Yeah.
Now, just briefly, with the Virgin Diet, you talked about 7 foods and sugar impact. It sounds like an extension of that. Are there any differences? Are there any things that you found that are continuous from the two books that are kind of thematic that keep them hanging together like a JJ Virgin philosophy?
Yeah, there's obviously, people are like, what's different? I go, this is where we really deep dive into sugar. I actually think you should do both programs. It just depends on if you feel like sugar is ruling your life or if you've got a whole host of food intolerance symptoms where you start. But I think you need to do both.
They overlap a lot, right?
They do and they don't. Honestly, they're very different approaches. And again, I think you do one then the other, and depending on what your issues are, you start, if you're just a total sugar addict, start there. If you have a lot of food intolerance symptoms, start there. But I think you do both. The common theme, though, is number one, I believe that food intolerance is the first key to overcoming your weight loss resistance, that we have weight problems not because we're overeating and under-exercising, weight problems because we damaged our metabolism, and the first place to heal is food, and to uncover your hidden food intolerances, whether they're corn, gluten, soy, eggs, or dairy, or whether they're sugar. figuring those out. But the common theme really in this one is sugar, gluten, and dairy are key in this program of taking them out, because when you look at gluten and you look at dairy, I mean, and I still, if someone doesn't have a dairy issue and they want to do some fermented full fat dairy, grass fed, fine. You know, that's not what people are doing now, as we know. But you know, gluten is a big issue. Gluten has high sugar impact. Gluten creates all sorts of problems. It's just like sugar. So you'll see some things in there of the way that I treat foods, because again, I'm not looking at foods as how many grams of sugar. I'm looking at the metabolic effect of the food based on fructose grams, glycemic load, fiber and nutrient density, and then how it impacts your gut microbiota and your leptin, insulin, and thyroid and ghrelin levels and your neurotransmitters. And that's really the key takeaway.
Well, JJ, this has been just loaded with information. It's such great stuff. I love all your books, all your programs. You just really have a way of getting to the heart of the matter and in your tough love way, telling people what they really need to know to really take back their health. So thank you so much for being with us. And I recommend all your books, The Virgin Diet and The New Sugar Impact Diet, which I'm really delving into now and enjoying a lot. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.